On September 21, 1956, a Grumman test pilot named Tom Attridge flew an F-11 Tiger off the runway at Calverton, Long Island, and shot himself down. That sentence sounds like a joke. It is not. Attridge fired a 4-second burst from his 420mm cannons during a shallow dive over the Atlantic, continued his descent, and flew directly into 3 of his own rounds. The airplane ingested 1 through the windscreen area and took 2 more in the engine. He crash-landed in the woods a mile short of the field, sheared off trees, and walked away with a broken leg and 2 fractured vertebrae. The F-11 Tiger became the only jet aircraft in history to shoot itself down. If that story hooks you the way it hooked me, hit subscribe and drop a like. Tell me in the comments what other bizarre aviation incident deserves a full breakdown. That one click keeps these deep dives coming. The phone call reached the Grumman flight test office before Attridge reached the hospital. The details made no sense to the men who heard them. A pilot hit by his own gunfire. No ricochet off a target banner. No freak ground incident. Attridge had been at 13,000 feet over open water, firing at nothing but sky, and the airplane came back with 20mm holes in it, holes that matched the rounds he'd just fired. The ground crew at Calverton saw the F-11 come in low over the trees trailing smoke, gear partially extended, the right engine intake visibly damaged. They expected a flameout from bird ingestion or compressor stall. When the word came back that the damage matched 20mm impact signatures, the initial reaction from the engineering staff bordered on disbelief. According to the Grumman incident summary, one engineer used the word impossible, their word, not mine. The physics looked absurd on first inspection. A 20mm round leaves the muzzle of an M39 cannon at roughly 3,300 feet per second. The F-11 at the time of the burst pushed through roughly Mach 1 in a shallow dive. No pilot outruns a cannon shell. That much everyone understood. But Attridge hadn't outrun anything. He'd caught up. Here is what happened. Attridge began his test firing sequence at 13,000 feet, nosing over into a 20-degree dive and accelerating through the transonic range. He squeezed off the burst cleanly, approximately 70 rounds across 4 guns. The rounds left the muzzle at high velocity, but immediately began decelerating. Air resistance bled their speed. Gravity bent their trajectory into a ballistic arc. Attridge, meanwhile, kept accelerating in his dive for another 11 seconds before beginning his pullout at 7,000 feet. The rounds and the airplane converged on the same patch of sky at the same instant. The probability of that convergence sits somewhere between infinitesimal and once in the entire history of aviation. It happened exactly once. The British had stumbled into a related problem during World War II, when Spitfire pilots in steep dives occasionally observed their own tracer rounds curving back toward them, but no confirmed self-strike ever resulted. The geometry never quite closed. For Attridge, it closed. The investigation file contains a detail that has no bearing on the engineering analysis. A fisherman on a boat below the flight path reported hearing the cannon fire, and then, several seconds later, a sound he described as a car backfiring. That second sound almost certainly came from the engine ingesting the round. The fisherman's statement sits in the appendix of the Grumman report. It adds nothing to the engineering analysis. It survives because someone thought to ask him. Attridge recovered from his injuries and returned to flight status. He flew for Grumman for years afterward. The F-11 Tiger went on to serve with the Navy's Blue Angels from 1957 through 1969. The jet that shot itself down became the most photographed demonstration aircraft of its generation. Nobody at Calverton that September afternoon could have predicted that part. Bethpage, Long Island, 1952. Grumman's Plant 5 smelled like hydraulic fluid and cigarette smoke, and the engineering bullpen on the second floor held roughly 40 men drafting an airplane that did not yet have a Navy contract. The company designation read G-98. The ambition behind it read like a dare: build the Navy's first supersonic dayfighter, hang it off a carrier deck, and do it with a single engine producing less thrust than the competition's designs demanded. Grumman had earned its reputation building tough, heavy carrier-proof machines. the F-6F Hellcat, the F-8F Bearcat, the Panther and Cougar jets that fought over Korea. Every one of those airplanes prioritized survival over elegance. The G-98 broke that pattern. Chief designer Dick Hutton shaped a fuselage so slim and clean that visiting Navy evaluators called it the pretty one, against the brutish Vought and North American entries competing for the same requirement. Hutton's team tucked the air intakes into the wing roots, faired the canopy into a needle nose, and produced an airframe with less drag than anything Grumman had ever built. The engine made the gamble possible, and the gamble dangerous. Wright Aeronautical's J-65 Sapphire, a licensed copy of the British Armstrong Siddeley original, delivered 7,500 pounds of thrust in afterburner. That number sat at the bottom edge of what supersonic flight required. Hutton's team compensated with aerodynamic efficiency, shaving weight wherever the structure allowed. The empty airplane came in under 13,000 pounds, light for a Navy fighter, fragile by Grumman standards. The prototype flew on July 30, 1954, with Corky Meyer at the controls. Meyer reported pleasant handling, adequate power at altitude, and a disconcerting tendency for the engine to surge during high angle of attack maneuvering. That surge problem would shadow the F-11 through its entire career. The J-65 never fully shed its appetite for compressor stalls in the transonic range, precisely the flight regime where a fighter pilot needs the engine most. The Navy bought it anyway. Bureau of Aeronautics contract records show an initial order of 42 airframes in early 1955, later expanded to 199. Unit cost ran approximately $1.1 million, reasonable for the era, cheaper than the F-8 Crusader that Vought delivered around the same time, with nearly twice the thrust. The Navy designated it F-11 F1 Tiger, later simplified to F-11A under the 1962 tri-service system. Operational squadrons received their Tigers starting in 1957. VF-21 at Naval Air Station Miramar took the first deliveries. Pilots liked the cockpit visibility and the roll rate, and the stall characteristics behaved honestly enough to build confidence. They did not like the range. Combat radius on internal fuel sat around roughly 290 nautical miles, short enough that carrier air group commanders questioned whether the airplane could execute a meaningful fleet defense mission beyond the task force horizon. The fuel fraction simply could not support the intercept profiles that NORAD and Fleet Air Defense Doctrine demanded by the late 50s. The math told the story before the fleet ever sorted it out. Soviet naval aviation fielded the Tupolev Tu-16 Badger as its primary anti-ship strike platform by 1955. A Badger inbound at high altitude could launch a cruise missile at standoff ranges exceeding 100 nautical miles. An F-11 scrambling from a carrier deck needed to reach that launch point before the missile separated. 290 miles of combat radius left almost no loiter margin and no room for a missed intercept. Fleet tacticians ran the numbers and reached a conclusion the Tiger's admirers did not want to hear. The airplane arrived too late to a threat that had already moved beyond its reach. By 1961, the Navy pulled Tigers from frontline fighter squadrons. Total first-line service spanned roughly 4 years. The F-8 Crusader and the F-4 Phantom absorbed the fleet defense and air superiority roles. Tigers migrated to advanced training units and reserve squadrons, where they served capably for another decade. The airframe's one enduring assignment, the Blue Angels, kept it in the public eye long after the fleet forgot it. 199 airframes, a 4-year frontline career, and an engine that coughed at the worst possible moment. The F-11 Tiger looked like a footnote, an elegant dead end built for a threat window that closed before the airplane matured. The arithmetic said so plainly, even if the pretty one warranted a longer story. The F-11 Tiger did not shoot itself down because of a design flaw. It shot itself down because of arithmetic. Grumman's ballistics team reconstructed the event within 72 hours. Their findings filled 11 pages of technical appendix, and the math held up under every review that followed. The sequence demanded a specific combination of speed, angle, altitude, and timing that no test protocol had ever anticipated, because no one had modeled what happens when a supersonic airplane follows a ballistic arc that mirrors the trajectory of its own ordnance. Attridge rolled into his dive at 13,000 feet, pushing the nose over to 20 degrees below the horizon. The four M39 revolving cannons sat in the lower fuselage, clustered tight beneath the cockpit floor. When he pressed the trigger, the muzzle flash lit the underside of the airframe in a stuttering orange pulse. 600 rounds per minute per gun, 2,400 total. The shells punching out at 3,300 feet per second relative to the aircraft. In absolute terms, factoring the airplane's own velocity at roughly Mach 0.99, those rounds crossed the muzzle at close to 4,400 feet per second relative to the ground. Fast enough to kill anything they touched, but the rounds began dying the instant they left the barrel. Aerodynamic drag on a 20mm M50 projectile bleeds velocity at a brutal rate, roughly 40% of muzzle speed gone within 2,000 yards. Gravity pulled each round into a downward arc. The combination of drag and gravity bent the trajectory into a parabolic curve that steepened with every passing second, the shells slowing from supersonic to transonic to subsonic inside 3 seconds of flight time. Attridge kept diving. The J-65 engine pushed the Tiger through Mach 1 in the descent, accelerating where the rounds decelerated. He held the dive for 11 seconds after the burst, an eternity in a supersonic airplane bleeding altitude at better than 500 feet per second. The altimeter unwound through 10,000, 9, 8. The ocean filled the windscreen, gray-green and flat, horizon canted at the dive angle. At 7,000 feet, he initiated his pullout, hauling back on the stick, loading the airframe to 4 Gs as the nose tracked upward through the horizon. The pullout changed his flight path from a straight line into a curve. That curve intersected the ballistic arc of his own shells at a single point in space roughly 1 mile ahead of where he had fired them. The rounds arrived at that point traveling subsonic, perhaps 600 feet per second, spent and tumbling. The airplane arrived at the same point, still pushing past Mach 1. The closure rate meant the Tiger overtook the rounds from behind and slightly below, which matches the damage pattern Grumman documented. 1 strike near the forward windscreen frame, 2 impacts in the engine intake area on the right side. The Grumman report describes the convergence as a unique combination of flight path and projectile trajectory not previously considered in weapons separation analysis. That sentence, dry, technical, completely inadequate to how strange the event actually was, became the closest thing to an official explanation the company ever issued. The margin is the part that stays with you. 11 seconds of dive separated the burst from the impact. A half-second less on the trigger, a degree shallower on the dive angle, 200 feet higher on the pullout initiation. Any single variable shifted by a fraction, and the rounds pass harmlessly beneath the airplane or fall into the Atlantic a quarter mile ahead. The convergence required every parameter to align within tolerances tighter than most weapons systems achieve on purpose. Attridge did it by accident, in an airplane the fleet had already started to forget, on a routine test card that called for nothing more dramatic than confirming gun harmonization at altitude. He felt the impacts as 2 sharp jolts, like hitting a bird, he told Grumman investigators afterward. The engine wound down immediately. Oil pressure dropped to 0. Smoke filled the cockpit within seconds, acrid and black, cutting visibility to the instrument panel directly in front of his face. He dumped the canopy, got the gear partially extended on hydraulic residual pressure, and aimed for the tree line short of Calverton's runway. The Tiger hit the woods at roughly 200 knots and carved a trench through scrub pine for 900 feet before stopping. Zach Fisher, a 26-year-old lieutenant flying slot position for the Blue Angels, strapped into an F-11 Tiger at Pensacola in March of 1957 and performed the team's first public demonstration in the type. The crowd saw 6 navy blue jets in tight diamond formation, wingtip to wingtip, pulling 4 Gs through a loop at 300 knots. They did not see an airplane the fleet had already started pulling from carrier decks. They saw the prettiest thing in the sky. The Blue Angels kept their Tigers for 12 seasons. 12. The frontline squadrons discarded the F-11 after 4 years of operational service, but the demonstration team flew it from 1957 through 1969, longer than any other type in Blue Angels history up to that point. The reason had nothing to do with combat capability and everything to do with what the airplane did best: fly smoothly and beautifully at the speeds and altitudes where 500,000 spectators could actually watch it. The J-65's chronic compressor stall problem, the one that made fleet pilots nervous in combat maneuvering, barely mattered in the demonstration regime. Blue Angel's routine stayed below Mach 0.85. The engine behaved itself there. The Tiger's honest stall characteristics, no abrupt wing drop, no snap departure, gave formation pilots confidence to fly wingtip separations measured in 36 inches at 350 knots. Commander Dusty Rhodes, who led the team from 1959 to 1960, called the F-11 the most pleasant formation airplane I ever sat in. That quote appears in the team's official history, and Rhodes flew 7 different types across his career. The lightweight that limited fuel capacity for fleet defense turned into an asset for aerobatics. Under 13,000 pounds empty meant the Tiger responded to control inputs with a crispness that heavier fighters could not match. Roll rate exceeded the F-9F Panther. It replaced on the team by a wide margin. Spectators at air shows from El Centro to Jacksonville watched the diamond roll inverted in formation, the sun catching 6 polished canopies simultaneously, contrails curling off the wingtips in humid Gulf Coast air like white ribbons unspooling against blue sky. Grumman quietly supported the Blue Angels F-11 fleet with depot-level maintenance at Bethpage long after the production line shut down. The last Tiger rolled off the Bethpage line in 1958. By 1965, parts availability required Grumman engineers to fabricate components from drawings rather than pull them from inventory. The company absorbed costs that the Navy's budget did not fully cover. Sources conflict on exactly how much Grumman spent out of pocket on Blue Angel's maintenance during the final years. The accounting records from that era sit incomplete in the Grumman Corporate Archive at Cradle of Aviation Museum. The file has gaps. Tom Attridge watched the Blue Angels fly his airplane at least twice after his crash. He returned to full flight status by 1958. The broken leg healed, the vertebrae fused. He continued as a Grumman test pilot into the 1960s, transitioning to newer programs. His incident report stayed in the Grumman Engineering Library as a cautionary reference for weapons separation analysis on every subsequent fighter program the company built. The F-14 Tomcat team consulted it during early gunfiring envelope studies in 1970. The Navy retired the last Blue Angels F-11 in December of 1968. The replacement, the F-4 Phantom, carried more power, more fuel, more noise, more spectacle. Crowds loved the Phantom's twin trails of black smoke. Pilots missed the Tiger's fingertip responsiveness. The transition closed the book on an airplane that spent more of its service life as a performer than as a fighter. 199 F-11 Tigers built, 4 years of frontline squadron service, 12 years on the Blue Angels, 0 combat deployments, 0 air-to-air kills, 0 combat losses. 11 airframes lost to accidents across all operators during the type's full service life. Roughly 68,000 flight hours logged fleet-wide. 1 aircraft struck by its own gunfire on September 21, 1956, loss attributed in the Grumman incident record to projectile reingestion following convergent ballistic trajectory. Pilot survived. Airplane did not. The Navy Bureau of Aeronautics Accident Report, filed under serial number 138620, classified the event as operator-induced, then added a handwritten annotation in the margin. No recommended corrective action. Probability of recurrence considered negligible.